And right now, very pleased to have with us on the program tonight from townhall.com. Katie Pavlich is with us. Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Cam?
I'm good. Next best thing to having you here in studio. We appreciate you firing up the Skype this evening and joining us to talk a little Fast and Furious, a little Eric Holder. What do you make, I've got to ask, what do you make of the Breitbart.com story, the video of Eric Holder in 95 talking about the need to brainwash Americans into having an anti-gun attitude?
Where do I start with this one? I will first start by saying I'm not surprised. But secondly, in the video, and people can go watch it at Breitbart.com. We also have it up at townhall.com. Eric Holder, of course, equates violent crime with not criminals, but with guns, right? So instead of focusing on the real issue, which is violent criminal offenders, he focuses on guns. And the second alarming part of this is the word brainwashing. Just like Barack Obama got elected in 2008, they don't want people to know the facts. They don't want people to know their background. They don't want people to know their radical associations or their radical ideas, especially on the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment is such a politically toxic issue to take on. They just want you to fall in line and, be so-called brainwashed in order to get their policies through. The timing on this was interesting. 1995, right after the Republicans won the House back in 1994 after the assault weapons ban was passed. So it seems like this was a reaction to that. And then another thing that was alarming to me is using the public school system to brainwash kids into thinking that guns are bad. I don't know about you, Cam, but I didn't learn about guns from Hollywood. I learned about them from my father at a very young age, and that's why I know how to use them properly. It's no different than learning how to drive. I didn't learn how to drive from a Hollywood movie. I learned from my parents. And so, it never ends. But, fast forwarding to 9/11, after 9/11, Eric Holder wanted even harsher gun restrictions, saying that it was a safety terrorism issue to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. And now you fast forward to today and you have a little thing called Operation Fast and Furious, and you think, was that the modern-day version of brainwashing for us to think that weapons were going into Mexico with no basis or factual evidence to back that up? I think so. So if they're trying to get away from this idea, which I don't think they really are, of the Fast and Furious program being geared towards limiting Second Amendment rights, they're failing miserably. And this only reinforces the radical agenda of not only Eric Holder, but Barack Obama. There's a reason why Eric Holder was chosen by this president.
Oh, well, absolutely right. And it's interesting that in the past 48 hours, we've seen not only this video of Eric Holder in 95, which, again, I think speaks to his attitude. And as you said, when he was talking about violent crime, he didn't talk about the need to go after violent criminals. He didn't talk about the need to go after individuals who are breaking the law. He talked about inanimate objects, and he talked about changing Americans' attitudes towards these inanimate objects. Now, I would note, by the way, that in the 17 years since that video was recorded, we have more gun owners in this country. We have more guns in privately held hands than we did in 95. We have more right to carry holders, and we have a much lower violent crime rate than we did in 1995. Right. So I don't think that Eric Holder was successful in turning Americans' opinions anti-gun. As a matter of fact, I think Americans have decided that they don't want to be frightened about guns anymore. They want to be knowledgeable, they want to be responsible, and they know that they can be. But, you talk about not only this video, but the latest from Fast and Furious, where the apparently the lead suspect, the biggest fish that was caught in Fast and Furious, was caught and released months into this investigation. They had him. They had him dead to rights. And apparently they let him go, and they said, "Will you work for us?" And he said, "Sure." And they said, "Okay, well, here's our number. Give us a call sometime." And they never heard from him again.
Right. Surprise.
Well, I mean, Katie, that just seems so stupid. I mean, that just seems absolutely ludicrous. I don't know if this is how informants are developed on a regular basis, but call me sometime doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. So, of course, I think you have to ask, really, was this a part of the motivation here? You've got Eric Holder talking about the need to change to brainwash people into thinking that guns are bad. You've got ATF agents who are letting criminal suspects go and they're allowing guns to walk across the border.
Right.
What are we supposed to think at this point?
Well, and you look at this story of Manuel Acosta, and you have to remember, I don't know if your listeners know this, he was on a T3 wiretap throughout the year of 2010. Now, who approved that wiretap? Lanny Brewer. They knew exactly where he was, what he was doing throughout that year. And the reason why he got caught was not because of ATF tracking him down after they had all this information about him on their wiretap. He got caught and stopped by Border Patrol, who happened to call ATF. Now, he was stopped in May of 2010. And a lot of the news reports have been saying that this program would have been stopped, and not necessarily because the weapons that were purchased by Avila in January 2010 showed up at Brian Terry's murder scene, so that probably wouldn't have been prevented. They'd been smuggled into Mexico at that time. However, it just proves, once again, as we've been saying, none of these so-called law enforcement techniques that ATF was claiming to use during this operation make any sense. So you have to go back to, what was the real motivation here? You're really going to write a phone number on a $10 bill, give it to a guy who is making tons of money working for the cartels, smuggling weapons, and expect him to call you as an ATF agent who's responsible for enforcing firearms laws in the United States? I don't think so.
Okay, so let me pose this question to you and help me, because I've been thinking about this as well, Katie. We've been told by Eric Holder, we've been told by others in the Justice Department at ATF that Fast and Furious, while there were flaws, while it was regrettable, that ultimately it was productive. Ultimately it was successful because there were individuals who were indicted, including Mr. Acosta, right?
Right.
Okay, but we've also been told that the purpose for Operation Fast and Furious was not to go after guys like Acosta, who were seen as too small, but to go after the kingpins down in Mexico. So, which is why I guess they would say that when they had Acosta, they didn't arrest him, they didn't charge him because they were still believing that he could lead them to these bigger fish. Given the fact that ultimately this guy was the biggest fish that they caught, wouldn't that indicate that Fast and Furious did not achieve its stated objectives and in fact was a failure, a failed operation?
You go back to, this wasn't about stopping guns going into Mexico. They were trafficking guns into Mexico. The whole goal was to take down gun traffickers and big cartel members. They did the complete opposite, and they keep trying to sell this line that they were stopping the trafficking. The whole goal was to stop arms trafficking into Mexico. They did the exact opposite and then blamed gun shop owners for doing exactly what they were doing. There was no goal to take down a cartel. These minor players, and even Acosta, Acosta, who was, going to the house of one of the big fish that they were looking for, don't you think they would arrest him and get information and intelligence from him? I mean, writing your phone number on a $10 bill and expecting someone to call you after they go into Mexico, it's almost like they treated this guy, Acosta, as the same way as they treated guns. They acted like they put, battery GPS devices in two guns and thought that was going to get them somewhere. Apparently, writing your phone number on a $10 bill they thought would track them down.
Yeah, I got to tell you, yeah. Or
one more point, maybe they would have called the Mexican authorities and said, "Hey, we just didn't arrest this guy because he's going to the house of one of the big fish we've been working on. Maybe you should send your authorities in and find him because he's on this freeway and he's headed there." But oh wait, they didn't tell the Mexican authorities about Operation Fast and Furious, so of course they couldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And so once again, the stories that were told by this administration, I mean, really about the motivation for Fast and Furious, about the success of Fast and Furious, all of these stories, as you say, Katie, none of them add up. I mean, they just, we are still left with these huge questions that the administration cannot answer. And in fact, the stories just keep getting bigger and bigger because now we know, in addition to Operation Fast and Furious, that suspects who were under ATF surveillance were allowed to purchase and traffic guns into Mexico that were ultimately used against two ICE agents in an ambush there in Mexico. And this is, again, it happened while Operation Fast and Furious was taking place, but it happened in another state with another ATF field office monitoring the surveillance. And so now the question has to be asked, how many programs, how many operations like Fast and Furious were going on, and really, how many guns are we talking about? It was several thousand in Fast and Furious. All right, well, what about the operations in Texas? How many guns were allowed to cross over into the hands of cartel members in that operation, and how many more operations are out there?
Well, not to mention the Florida case, which we skimmed over a little bit a couple months ago,
Right.
and selling to cartel gang members in Honduras. Now, granted, South American countries also complain a lot about the so-called U.S. guns coming south. So why wouldn't they send guns to South America? You're right. We don't know how far it goes, and the bottom line is this. Fast and Furious by itself has had very serious consequences, both in the United States and in Mexico. And even Eric Holder, he's not willing to really admit much, but he's at least willing to admit that we'll see deadly consequences of the program moving forward for years or decades to come.
Talking with Katie Pavlich from townhall.com. And, Katie, I know that you're getting ready to report even more developments in this story tomorrow, right?
Yes, I have a story coming out tomorrow, and it's basically Special Agent in charge of the Phoenix Field Office, Bill Newell, who was in charge of Fast and Furious, is working heavily with Dennis Burke at the U.S. Attorney's Office, has lawyered up, and the same goes for Group 7, Supervisor David Voth. If you remember David Voth, he was the one in charge of the Operation Fast and Furious group, in charge of the whistleblowers who came out in front of Congress on June 14th to tell their side of the story. They've lawyered up, and they're basically saying in no way, shape, or form did my clients order gun walking or approve these tactics. So we're back to square one. If you'll remember, Bill Newell in his testimony on July 26th last summer, gun walking was never part of the plan, that it wasn't used, got in a pretty big confrontation with Chairman Issa over the issue. Well, he has a lawyer now, and he's accusing Issa and Grassley of misrepresenting the statements of his client, and they're asking for the record to be straightened. So I have a whole piece going up on that around midnight. And it'll be available all day tomorrow on townhall.com.
All right. Katie, again, really appreciate you coming on the program. Now, listen, before we let you go, I got to ask, what's this stuff about Women's History Month only being for those on the left?
Yes, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz and Representative Norton and Sandra Fluke. Some people say Fluck, but I refuse to say that. I say Fluke just in case.
Okay.
So slip of the tongue. They had a celebration today on Capitol Hill of Women's History Month. They would not return my calls or answer my questions about whether any conservative Republican women were invited.
What was Sandra Fluke doing there? I thought didn't the president just tell us she wasn't a public figure and.
Right, but now she's palling around with public officials and apparently speaking for women everywhere. She doesn't speak for me, that's for sure.
I can't keep track of this stuff. It's almost like they just make up the rules as they go along, Katie.
It's almost like they make it up as a distraction for important things, Tam.
Hey, Katie, all right, so let me ask you a question then. Who's your favorite conservative woman in history?
Ooh, history or modern day?
Well, I mean, we can do current events too.
I like Susan B. Anthony. She was a conservative lady. And I like Sarah Palin, and I'm not afraid to say it. So
Sarah Palin and Susan B. Anthony. All right. Katie Pavlich, appreciate you coming on the program. Always a real pleasure. And next time, let's do it in studio, okay?
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks again. Katie Pavlich joining us from townhall.com.